Hey guys, I am back today to talk to you about a subject that is near and dear to my heart. And it's kind of personal, and I debated about whether or not I should talk about it from a personal perspective. But I really feel like this is something that could benefit a lot of parents, especially parents who have kids that have ADHD. So today, I'm going to talk to you about my personal experience as a person who has had ADHD my entire life. I'm Jen Pearson from Confidently Homeschool. Thanks for joining me. And so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my life with ADHD. I grew up back in the 70s and 80s before ADHD was as commonly diagnosed as it is now. So I wasn't actually diagnosed until I was in my 40s. And I am not really sure why that's the case because looking back, it is painfully obvious that I had ADHD and really struggled with it throughout my childhood. I look back at my schoolwork and at my report cards, and they say things like, Jennifer doesn't live up to her potential and needs to try harder or wasn't paying attention and various things like that. So I spent my entire childhood very confused about what was wrong with me. I always had the feeling that something was wrong. My parents, to their credit, were extremely supportive of me, and they always assured me that nothing was wrong with me and that I was very intelligent. And that was nice and it was helpful in many ways. But in some ways, it wasn't helpful to me because I knew something was going on. I knew somehow things were easier for other kids than they were for me. And I was constantly being told that I didn't live up to my potential or I wasn't working as hard as I should. But I felt like I was. So let me take just a step back. I'd like to tell you about what it felt like as a child with ADHD, going through school, basically with undiagnosed ADHD, and what my experience was like. I was, I think, a really good kid. I was one of those kids that was eager to please. I wanted to make my teachers and my parents happy. I wanted my parents to be proud of me. I wanted to get good grades. And I always, I really tried. I felt like I would go to school, and I remember periodically, like every few weeks or so, maybe every few months, maybe every trimester when they came out with report cards, I would say to my parents, I am going to turn over a new leaf. I'm going to stop talking in class and stop getting in trouble for that. I'm going to stay seated. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to do really well. And I would go to school with this just renewed commitment to do it. And I remember it would work for like maybe a day or two when I was really focusing on doing those things. And then as soon as I started to kind of relax, I would find all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I was talking again when I wasn't supposed to be and I got in trouble. Or why was I out of my seat? Like the teacher had told us to sit down and suddenly I'm in trouble for being out of my seat. And I didn't even realize that I had gotten up. Like sometimes it almost felt like, I had no idea. Like I just all of a sudden felt the need to go get a tissue or go do whatever it was. And I was in trouble. And I felt like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't do what was expected of me. And it was really, really difficult for me because I wanted so badly to do the right things and I didn't want to get in trouble. And I remember, almost every day I would get my name put up on the board and they would write our name on the board. And then if you had 3 check marks after your name, then you lost part of your recess time or you had to sit and write, I will not talk in class or something like that over and over, which I've got to say is the absolute worst punishment for someone with ADHD, not only because it's unpleasant for them, but because it makes it worse. Like kids with ADHD need more exercise, more outside time, more recess, because that helps them to get those like jiggles and jumps out and helps their brain to refocus and be ready for more learning after that break. So the fact that I rarely got a full recess period when I was in school really didn't help. And I remember, sitting there on the playground a lot of times. They'd have the kids that had gotten in trouble that day sit at the edge of the playground, and we had to write our sentences or sit there for a particular amount of time before we could go play with everyone else. And I remember sitting there and just wanting so badly to go run and get some of my energy out. And some days I didn't get any recess at all. I had to sit there pretty much the whole time because I'd gotten in trouble several times for talking that morning or for being out of my seat or something like that. So it was really, really hard. And I kept feeling like I was so confused because I felt like my teachers thought I was a bad kid. Like to them, it seemed like I was being intentionally defiant. They would tell us to be quiet and I would start talking. They would tell us to sit still and stay in our seats and I would get up. But I knew I was trying to be a good kid. I was really trying to do the right thing. And it just felt like some unseen force was keeping me from doing what they wanted me to do. And so there was this sort of battle inside me of like, am I a good kid or am I a bad kid? And I really felt like I was good, but I felt misunderstood. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is ADHD is one of the very few disabilities or very few psychological conditions that you are punished for having. And it happens all the time, whether it's in school or parents. And I'm not at all faulting teachers or parents because it's hard to understand it from the outside. But I'll tell you from someone who's lived through it, those kids a lot of times are trying their very best to pay attention. They're trying their very best to do what's expected. And it's just very, very difficult. Sometimes it's close to impossible for them to do it the way it's expected. When a child with ADHD is really bored in class, for example, it's extremely, extremely difficult for them to sit still and pay attention to what's being taught. Now, if that material can be more interesting, they can really focus. If they find it interesting, kids with ADHD and adults with ADHD can actually hyper-focus on it. But if they're not interested and if they're bored, it's going to be impossible, pretty much. So to punish them for that doesn't make it any easier for them. It just makes it more frustrating. And it might increase the stakes of it, like they're trying to avoid punishment. So they might, in the short term, be able to focus a little bit better, kind of like I did when I was like, I'm going to turn over a new leaf. And it would last for a couple of days while you're really focusing hard to try to do better in that area. But then after a little while, you kind of have to relax. Like your mental energy just can't be consumed with that forever. And then if it's boring and you relax a little bit and you don't have kind of this threat to motivate you anymore, then you start to have trouble paying attention again and you have trouble being quiet and not talking in class again. And so I think threats of punishment or punishing kids with ADHD is just not a good way to handle it. What they really need more of is understanding and more engaging education and more breaks throughout the day and more exercise, more recess. And I know that's really difficult in a traditional school setting. And that's one of the reasons I chose to homeschool my kids, because we're able to take a break when they need to, or do things in a different way that are more interesting and engaging. And they can do math problems while jumping on a trampoline if they need to. And it just gives us a lot more flexibility. And I realize that's not possible for all parents. But more than anything, kids with ADHD need compassion and understanding. And they don't need to be punished for the behaviors that go along with ADHD. That's not going to help. It's probably going to make it worse. And it's probably going to just hurt your relationship with them if you're a parent or teacher. So try to think of it from their perspective and realize how difficult it is for them to be quiet, sit still, and pay attention. Those are just things that are not easy for kids that have ADHD. So this was my perspective from my life and what I experienced as a child. A little bit of hope for parents of kids with ADHD. I was eventually able to be successful in school. I have 2 master's degrees, and I found it actually got easier as I went through school and got to higher levels of education because there was less time that I had to just spend in class doing boring things, and the material became more and more interesting to me. And I love learning. I love learning new things. So it became something that actually I was able to almost hyper-focus if I was interested in the material. So schooling became easier and easier as I got to higher and higher levels of education. So there is hope for your children. They will be able to succeed in school. You may have to have some accommodations, but definitely some understanding will help them more than anything. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe so that you can continue to be notified of new videos. I plan on posting regularly further videos about living life with ADHD and tips and techniques for educating children with ADHD and other homeschooling topics. I would love it if you would subscribe to my channel so that we can continue to have this dialogue. If you have anything you would like to see in a future video, any questions you have about homeschooling or life with ADHD, please add those in the comments and I will try to address them in future videos. Thanks and happy homeschooling.